I am super excited to introduce our guests tonight. We are joined by the Marshalls, Dr. John Marshall, who received his training from Duke University, the University of Louisville, and Georgetown University. He is the Chief of Hematology and Oncology at the Lombardi Comprehensive Cancer Center and a Professor of Medicine and Oncology at Georgetown University. Additionally, he serves as director of the Otto J. Reusch Center for the Cure of Gastrointestinal Cancers, which is also a part of Georgetown University. Dr. Marshall is an internationally recognized expert in new drug development for GI cancer, and his primary focus is on the use of precision medicine in treating cancer. Liza Marshall is a graduate of Duke University and the University of Virginia School of Law and practiced communications law until the mid-2000s when she retired from practice and shifted her focus to managing her family and her volunteer work. She helped found a cancer support organization, Hope Connections for Cancer Support, in Bethesda, Maryland. And in 2006, at the age of 43, she was diagnosed with triple-negative breast cancer, a particularly aggressive form of the cancer. Liza continues to be an active volunteer at Hope Connections, her church, and other local nonprofits, serving on boards, directing development campaigns, and supporting a variety of communities and missions. And the Marshalls are being interviewed tonight by Beth Ann Patrick, who is a writer, author, and critic. Her monthly column on hot books appears in the Washington Post. Her book reviews and author profiles appear in the Los Angeles Times, the Boston Globe, Poets and Writers magazine, and on NPR Books, among others. The author of 2 books for National Geographic and editor of an anthology for Reagan Arts, Patrick is currently writing a memoir for Counterpoint Press. She is first VP and Programs Committee Chair at Penn Faulkner. Patrick lives in Northern Virginia with her family and far too many books, some of which we can see in her background. So I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing. So our interview panelists will take up the screen, and I'll hand it over to you, Beth Ann.
Thank you, Brittany. Thank you, Jennifer. And Liza and John, I'm so delighted to be here with you. Thanks for your time this evening. And thank you for your book, Off Our Chests. I want to make sure we show it as often as possible. It's pretty nice, you guys. It's a beautiful, beautiful book. And it has a beautiful blurb from Katie Couric at the top, Arlington's own. So this is a great chance for me to speak to you about a book that's a little unusual because, yes, it's about breast cancer, but it's written by a pair of, by a couple and not just by one patient. And in this case, John, you're a doctor, but you stepped into the caregiver's shoes. So we'll be talking about that this evening. And I'm going to try to keep our conversation to about 30 minutes, maybe a little longer, so we have plenty of time for questions from you in the audience. But please, even if you think there are lots of other questions, you can vote up questions that you want to in the Q&A. So I'll get to the ones that have the largest number of votes first. So I think one of the biggest questions, Liza, is about what this book is and what this book isn't. So I'm going to ask you to start, and I know John will chime in.
Yeah, not shy. Yeah, so it's an excellent question. We actually struggled with that, I think, and maybe even continue to struggle with what is and what it isn't. We we first started out to tell the story because we did think that we had a unique perspective that that could maybe enlighten people, I guess, about several different aspects of people in the cancer, in a cancer diagnosis journey. Mm-hmm. But, John at one kept saying, well, I think this is a how-to guide. And to me, I kept envisioning what to expect when you're expecting, the question, and then here are 3 things you need to do, and this is the person you need to call. And I didn't see it as that so much, but I've been interested since we published it. We've had people say, "Well, this is just a really good guide to what to expect when you've gotten a cancer diagnosis." So I've had to see that to John that perhaps he was correct in that it was more of one than I envisioned. But I think it also is it really is an attempt to just give people an insight. I think John uses the term "pull back the curtain on cancer care." And he does a lot of his parts in the book are really about the policy, the practice of oncology, which I think a lot of people don't really get to hear very much, or the layperson.
Again, as throughout the book, I'm wrong again. I did want to create sort of a how-to book, and we did fight back against that. And in the process, maybe, as Liza said, we do have certainly an inside look to the world of cancer from all the perspectives. But what it really did for me in many ways, for the white coat side of things, is gave me a really new perspective on the business that we run here and around the world to try and treat and cure cancer, and what it feels like. It's less doctor-patient, and it's now a relationship going forward, and really exploring that relationship, what we bring into the room, what the patient brings into the room. So we've actually been very well received from the medical community, the oncology community.
I love hearing that. I'm sorry to interrupt you, but I love hearing that, because there are a couple of places where and they're John's sections where things do veer more into how to or step by step, but those are also very important parts of the book. And it must have been something that you wondered about and worried about in the process of writing the book, how it would be received by the medical community. So that's an extremely important piece. And so I want to go into the process before we talk a little bit more about that. I know that you had an article written about your journey in Arlington magazine, and our mutual friend, Marianne Zegedy-Mazak, who is an amazing journalist, writer, and all around, artist, encouraged you to write a full-length book. And I love that she did, because if Marianne is many things and multi-talented, but I know she can spot a really good story. And she's helped me with my writing work as well. So what convinced you, each of you, separately and together, to take that advice?
Yeah, we're very different in that regard. I think John writes all the time. John loves public speaking. He's very much out there. And for me, I thought, and that's what it was private. I wasn't sure I had anything to say to people, I guess. And I actually remember Marianne saying to us early on, she said to me, we were getting ready to go away, but to write this, and I'll go back to that. But she said, you've got to really work on your internal editor. And I think so. It was a little bit more for me, I think, convincing me that this was something that I did have something to say that would be useful. I mean, that this wasn't maybe just another breast cancer story, because there are a lot out there, and they are all very valuable, but it's hard to believe that you're adding something to that. So I think, but anyway.
But when she said that, we weren't in the mindset. We weren't ready. We didn't have time. It was still, even, what was that, 10 years after, 6 years after? I don't know. It was a while after your diagnosis.
Still very tender, I'm
still
sure.
Fresh. It was still fresh. And we tried, and honestly, it just didn't feel right. We weren't ready to put down what we thought someone else would want to read. For me, it also clearly had a therapy element to it. I mean, I needed to pause and stop and really reflect on, my own career, our practice, and what we were doing. And it really gave me the vehicle to do that.
It's really interesting to me, because there are so many things that you're extremely honest about in the book. And I want to touch on one that I normally wouldn't talk about, which is faith. You are both committed people of faith, and you're also not pushing it on anyone else. I know the faith held you up through your cancer journey, but you also both know very well that there are many people who have a different kind of faith, or none whatsoever. And so one of the things I'm wondering, since we know from reading off our chests some of the things that held you up in the bleakest moments, and that wasn't just spirituality, it was other things, as well. But what are some of the commonalities that cancer patients and survivors have in common that hold them up when things are at the darkest points?
Yeah, and it's something I try and deal with and embrace and maintain and support 20 times a day during clinic.
Right.
How do you, and everybody, as you say, comes into the room with a different focus, a different structure that's holding them up. And sometimes you can see the structure's not there, and you've got to figure out what you're going to put in to hold them up and make suggestions. Hope Connections has been an outlet for many of our patients. Resources like that, so that people know that there's others out there going through the same thing. So there is no one prescription for what we'll call the maintenance of hope. And we were grounded in faith. We understood it. We believed it. We have felt the presence of God in our lives over time. And so that was a natural for us. It wasn't, we didn't all of a sudden become that. It was just It was already there and structure, a part of our lives. But that faith community also incredibly supported us. But you're right, you can't push that on somebody. You have to figure out where they are.
Right. But I think there are a lot of avenues for people who don't necessarily have a faith community. And I mean, a lot. I mean, I'm amazed at how many yoga for cancer patient classes there are. But I think that's a real area or gap in people's treatment, and it's a place that people can go where they do. I mean, I think find both social support, but also that moment of removing yourself, focusing just on yourself. I mean, maybe removing yourself from the world and having that moment of quiet and that moment of communing with whatever that, of just something outside yourself that is not your cancer. I think those can be really important. There are a lot, meditation, journaling. There are a lot of, I think a lot in Life with Cancer, which is Fairfax's sort of similar to the Hope Connections, and even in Virginia Hospital Center also have excellent programs that do, I think, really provide similar types of things for people who are not people of faith.
I mean, when you've got a diagnosis of cancer, your life just immediately changes. Yeah. And in a way, the way I describe it, because it's the way I felt, you're falling, right? And you can't really hold on to anything around you because you don't know. It's that you've lost control. Around here, Washingtonians, Arlingtonians don't like that.
That's true.
So you need to hold on to something so that you can just feel some grounding. So almost, the most successful cancer experiences, I think, because you're trying to make the best of it, right, is those who can find that hold, can find that ground, and through a variety of mechanisms.
And I think, Liza, something you said about finding ways to have an experience where you can be outside of the cancer. That's a way to get away from what John just described, the falling. Right. It's a way to be completely apart from it. And I have so many things to ask, and I'm going to jump ahead for a moment, because Liza, you talk in every chapter about, you make yourself out to be more of a control freak than I think you really are.
Oh, she is. She really is.
But you are a force of nature, and you're not used to being taken care of. You're used to taking care of people. And what have you learned about letting go? Because John just spoke so eloquently about people in our region letting go of control. And the corollary that goes along with this is you speak in the book frequently about the importance of a support network and how this was very, very helpful to you. And I wonder, how did you let go of the need for control, and how accepting support has changed you?
Yeah, I'm not sure if I ever did. I can say I have actually figured out how to let go. I mean, I think, again, it's sort of forced upon you, right? I mean, there's just some things all of a sudden I had to spend a whole day lying in a bed attached to an IV. So, not only was about giving up some of the things in my life that I was doing, but also turning that into something that was enjoyable and not allowing it to be the downer of the week. And a lot of that was just not doing, as I say, I was fortunate. I didn't have a cell phone that got email on it. I didn't get texts. It was a lot easier to let go in 2006 than it is.
That is so true.
I would highly recommend turning your phone off. But of course, I realize at the same time, none of us can do that. So these days, it's hard to do. Although we all survived a day without Facebook yesterday, apparently.
We did. It's kind of amazing, right?
And then I'm sorry, the second part of your question
was about what has changed for you from accepting that support and seeing how valuable it is?
Yeah, I mean, I think I am better at that. I mean, again, I'm not sure. I wish I could say I have changed dramatically in both of those regards. But I would say that it has caused me to be much more cognizant of other people's need for support, and that it actually requires, I mean, getting other people to siege control requires taking it a little bit. And I think Marianne had some great advice. And Marianne not only helped us with the book, but she ran a meal train for us during my treatment. And she was good about just saying, this is what we're doing. This person's showing up on Tuesday night with 2 meals for you all for this week, you know, and here's the schedule. And when it's presented like that, I think it's harder to say no in a good way. You know, I mean, I'm certain there are situations in which that's not, but just telling people that you have taken care of this. You know, I'm driving you. I'm whatever. I'm bringing your kids home from softball practice. You know, it's
well, that experience to me has also made me, when on first visits, when I tell patients or recommend to patients that not only do they have one story, so that they're not telling one group this, one group that, but when the village asks to help, say yes, put their names on the refrigerator and give them a job. I mean, if you don't have a Mary Ann who's going to be the corporal sergeant, then you know, say yes and give them a job, because that's the best way to handle it. And I do think we, as physicians, so one of the things we sort of recognized from our experience is that it takes a lot to get that patient delivered on Tuesday afternoon to the clinic on time, with the right blood counts, refills in hand, and you know, work taken care of, and the kids are in the right place. So that's really hard if you add that into your already busy life. Forget the emotional element of it. So let those people help you.
It's a really hard thing to do. And one question I want to throw in before I ask John a little bit more about becoming a caregiver is another thing I found really valuable and very moving about Off Our Chests was that you each talk more than once about decisions you made that weren't the right choices, or things you could have done differently. Liza, when you finally decided to get your Metaport put in, I nearly wept with gratitude, thinking of, I have really bad veins, and I know, you know, the problems there. And, you know, John, you were also very honest about a couple of mistakes you made. And I know anyone going through a journey like this is going to have to say, at the time, it was the right thing to do. But could you each talk about something that you know you did because of holding on to something you didn't want to let go of? Is that a fair question?
Yeah, I mean,
for you.
I really couldn't share insight, right? So a normal caregiver researches and, you know, is there with the clipboard and all of those things, and then coaches, right?
Right.
But I actually, you know, my brain kept going to dark places where I knew this disease could go. And so I would be there to answer, but, you know, I really drew a line at that. So those were things that maybe, if I don't ever want to do it again, by the way. So, but if you know, I think be a more engaged in all of that. I became very withdrawn, I think.
Yeah. Well, and you talk about why in the book as well. So, you know, we learn about that part of your journey, and that is definitely not the how-to part, John. That is definitely from the heart.
Yeah.
So, and you know,
well, you know, part of it was, my team, the white coated team, if I don't write it for real, or patients too, I mean, it's not meaningful to anybody. I mean, what are we sharing that you can't already find on the shelf? And so it really got down to needing to share those things, not only for my own well-being, but that's where I hoped the value would be to the reader, that they could see where they're doing that or not doing that and make their own decision, but at least having some, language around it or some acknowledgement that it could happen.
How about you, Liza?
Something that something that I wish I had done differently.
Yeah, that was there because of something that's been with you for a long time, some psychological mechanism, whether a defense mechanism or not, just something you wish you had been able to let go of.
Well, I actually, part of the reason we didn't write the book for a while, or part of the reason I was resistant, is because my parents were very odd throughout all of this. And I think I wish in many ways that I had had some conversation with them at the time about my cancer. I mean, I wish I had said something to them that used the word cancer related to me in a sentence, which I really didn't, because I knew they would both just, I don't know, I didn't know what they would do, I guess. I mean, they obviously were incredibly uncomfortable with it. And I think, in retrospect, that probably was a little damaging to all of us, that we never had that conversation. Anyway, so I guess that's something that I sort of think at the time I should have handled differently, and in retrospect, it would have been beneficial to all of us had I handled it differently. They weren't going to handle it differently, but I could have pushed it,
Well, and of course, the reason I wanted to ask you this question is it's so interesting because neither one of you responded with anything immediately technical or medical or process related. You both talked about things that are very much, they're about emotions. And another part of the book that I think people are going to appreciate, those who haven't read it yet, and I hope all of you do. I hope win it in the raffle, buy it at your independent bookstore. You really want to see the progress of a long and very strong marriage. I happen to have been married as long as, because we're all the same age, and I think I met my husband the same year you two met. So I know what this is like, and I know what it's like to go through certain kinds of trauma in a marriage, not the same as you do, but I think that is a very important part of Off Our Chests. It's not just John being this super duper amazing oncologist who has a wife who gets cancer. It's also about being a couple making this journey.
Well, that's the part, people ask what the title of the book. I mean, it's yes, it's off our chest to others, but it's off our chest to each other, really, for the first time. Is that
nicely done?
It took 15, 16 years for me to get the nerve to write some of the things I wrote, to get it off my chest. And then actually, when we shared, what we wrote, it was an interesting few days while we were sharing that information. But again, the risk here is that if somebody fresh in the middle of this journey, those kinds of, things we referred to aren't necessarily ready for everybody. Right. So we have had some people read it and realize they just can't, this is not time for that right now. Right. So others are reading it in the night, and others are closing it halfway and saying maybe later, because it's bringing out things in themselves which they're struggling with.
Well, yes. Go ahead. That's sort of the lesson. One of the lessons I think of a marriage or a long relationship is you don't always have to say everything you're thinking. Right. I think this isn't a how-to, and these are conversations you should have with your spouse, because they're actually probably are conversations you shouldn't have with your spouse when you're both in the middle of it.
Well, one of the things that you rightly point out, and we are, this is one of my questions, was about what you found most difficult in writing about your experiences. And so this is the perfect, point to talk about that is, intimacy is something that can get lost at many different points along the way in a marriage. It doesn't take necessarily cancer to cause that to happen. For some people, a loss of intimacy results in a divorce or something else. But you did find that some of the time you were able to spend together was so different and so out of your usual very busy lives that you were able to reconnect in a way that you hadn't been able to for years. And I found that incredibly moving and inspirational too.
Well, it's, we could have gone this way too.
Right, right.
But I think your point about, we were dedicated, still are dedicated to each other. And in the, John, go boil water, something's going wrong here moment, it's, I was over here really self-important in many ways about what I was doing. Liza had given up or traded off, is really a better way to say it, her professional career for her family management career. And we never discussed that either. Frankly, it just sort of evolved over time. Or I mean, but so this did go whack, right? It's like the pandemic has done for many of us, right? It's in a way, there was no choice at that point. We were going to do this together, and pleased to say we made it through.
There's one chapter, is it wham that you say? Wham. There are just things that come at you in the entire journey through cancer, no matter what the outcome is, that come at you like wham. And that also happens, of course, in personal relationships. And I was wondering what and we're going to go a little bit longer because we only have one question in the Q&A now. So people, off our chests, ask questions. Liza and John Marshall are here for you. But I have more time now to ask my questions. And one of them is advice for couples, a caregiver and a patient, about documenting their experience. And I don't mean that everyone has to write a book or a memoir or, some kind of elegiac sort of thing. But, I mentioned a friend named Lisa Boncheck-Adams, who died of metastatic breast cancer in 2015. And she became well known for blogging about her cancer journey, partly because she was very, very practical and organized. And so she would talk in blog posts about, look, if you're going through this like I am, here are the kinds of records you might be interested in keeping. Here, maybe someone wants a file for medical records and a file for personal reflection. Maybe someone wants to write a letter to a child, et cetera, et cetera. So just one piece of advice from each of you about what a couple going through this together might want to document.
That's a tough one. I think it's really different for everybody. I don't think there's, again, one prescription for that. I think back to the journey is very busy, and you're keep trying to kind of bring it back to normal and think about something other than the next scan or the next treatment. So you do spend a lot of energy on that, and the couple piece of that can be very helpful. I mean, of trying to be in the same place, because you're often not in the same place, right? I'm over here, can't go to sleep because I'm afraid she's going to die, and she's snoozing away because she, so or she had chemo that day, so and doesn't want to think about it. So they're having some way of maybe thinking about that early on. But there's so many things you're juggling early on. You're just trying to feel the ground underneath you. And not everybody's a reliable documenter. So, you talk about blogs. I mean, as you were talking about that, the internet is actually a pretty scary place for a cancer patient. And because of its unfiltered nature,
right? Because
anyone can post anything. As with any field, there's a lot of misinformation out there. So most of the time, we're directing people to sources and not just blindly putting in, web searches or to look for somebody who's blogging. So to those patients out there who may be listening, just, be careful. I mean, there are very good sources and good guides out there, but sometimes they're not obvious.
And I should add a couple of things. One, I love the fact that your footnotes are to proper peer-reviewed sources. And so if there is something you're mentioning, like the platinum drugs, for example, anything you find in Off Our Chests is a link to something that is a peer-reviewed, medical article. And I won't vouch for any blogs except Lisa's, and the reason for hers is because she was not and never tried to give medical advice, only personal experience. And so any blog that you go to, people, where someone is trying to say, this is what you should do or, shouldn't do, turn it off. That's
yeah. One thing that comes to mind, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to step on you, but in terms of documentation, one of the lessons we learned was about dealing with our children. And that is, the kids were 10 and 14. And, we told them honestly what we thought was going on and that we were going to hopefully be okay. And we tell them if anything changed. Well, the reality is that Arlington magazine was the first time, and now they're, older and now adults reading the book. They're like, we didn't have any idea that it was like that. So in some way, that sort of regroup, debrief with your kids may be important. If you are at different points and you think you've ticked the box, maybe you haven't, because they've changed, their brains have changed, they've filed it in a different way, and they're ready to receive it in a different way.
And thank you for saying that, not just for your own children's sake, but for your sake, because John, we do learn in this book that you lost your mother to cancer when you were 13. And it was a time when people really hid cancer. People did not talk about it, even in the smallest of family circles. So it is important to reach out to your own family circle and make sure that they get the information they need. And just, this is what we do with our kids, right? It's like with sex education. You want them to have their questions answered, but not give them too much.
Yeah, the kids didn't want to read that part of the book, by the way. It's not graphic, but they didn't want to know it at all.
No, they didn't. You need to redact that part. Right. Now, I want to get to the questions. And so I'm going to skip ahead. And many of the members of the audience this evening may have had experience with breast cancer or have family members with breast cancer or not. But I do think breast cancer matters to everyone. But I also know that, look, this is the cover of the book. It's a tattered pink ribbon. It's not a shiny one. And I think sometimes queen breast cancer needs to be taken down a notch. I know from reading the book that you both agree with that. So, John, I'm just going to ask you, why does breast cancer need to be put maybe in a little perspective right now during October Breast Cancer Awareness Month?
I really don't want them taken down. I want the rest of us to come up to their level in many ways. I mean, my sort of jousting with breast cancer all my career has been really a jealousy as I take care of GI cancer patients and see the success that research and funding and coordinated effort and advocacy has done. It makes me jealous. I think it was the Sunday Washington Post, and on Saturday Night Live this weekend, there were 2 references to colonoscopies, neither of which was like mandatory societal thing you had to do. It was something to dread, right? Whereas mammography is societal, required. You have to do it.
You still dread it.
You dread it.
But thank you, Liza. Thank you. For women everywhere.
Yeah. So no, I get it. I totally get it. But so how do we? That's what I want for the other groups, and the success, their success, the breast cancer research success, in my opinion, is the reason this woman is still sitting here next to me. And so how do I convince others to, let's do that for colon cancer, pancreas cancer, lung cancer, ovarian cancer, all really rough cancers. that could use the help too.
Well, and I mean, to John's point, I mean, obviously we are being inundated with this at the moment, but I turned on Let's Make a Deal yesterday while I was folding laundry, and it was the breast cancer episode. I mean, everybody there was a breast cancer survivor, and all I could think was, do they have a colon cancer episode or any other? I mean, you know, lung cancer, brain cancer. I mean, no, of course. I mean, and you know, I would be very interested to know why that specific show. I mean, probably because there are a lot of women watching it is my guess, but it is very stark, the contrast between all of the things that have a breast cancer something in October that don't cover any other disease, any other cancer. So
it's so hard, the commercialization of breast cancer support. I mean, it's very easy to make a pink lipstick. It's much harder to make a brown one, John.
Brown one, yeah.
much more popular.
Blue is popular.
Well, I am going to ask some of these wonderful questions, but of course, we can keep talking in between, or you can answer these at any length you like, because we do have time. So Lynn asks, and did John change the way he related to his patients after caring for and supporting Liza? And this is something you really do talk about in the book. I think you have a great answer, John. So please.
Yes, and it broke me. So, you know, having felt what it's like to receive the news, not to give it, but to receive it, and to go through the treatments and what low-level side effects feel like, and all of those things made me really want to, and well, really the care we received fundamentally, as we were spoiled rotten by the team at Georgetown, that I wanted to try and provide that for everybody. And then I lost objectivity because they had my cell phone and my email, and you know, they would, at first they were kind of respectful of that and only bugged me when it really needed me, and then it became like, you know, anything they thought about, they would send to me, and so trying to be there for these folks who did need me and the support. In the end, you know, really, I exhausted me, and so oncology now is one of the highest, if not the highest, burnout subspecialties there is in medicine because of this. And so the book is a product of that, because I had to get away.
Well, you talk about there being limits to empathy, and I really think there are, but maybe not limits to compassion. So how did you pull back, limit your empathy, but open your compassion so you could continue your career, but not burn out?
Well, I do share. I mean, that's why the book being public in our story is not anything different. We've shared our story with our patients and people we know. And so we use it as an example to say, we basically know how you feel. And it sort of changes the relationship a little bit. And, but it also puts the white coats at some risk, right? So you have, because then, you know, when they get a bad scan, you're getting a bad scan. And
there are only so many times a day you can do that.
You can do that, right? Right. So, but so coming back post sabbatical, I have to say, I can feel it slipping again, because you get connected to people. You are a human being. You are trying to be there. You know what it feels like again, and you know you have. But I actually know I've got to put some guardrails up to make sure that that's better. So we're, you know, putting patients through the portal instead of my email, so I can decide when to look at the communications, and you know, try and pick times of the day, if you will, when this is what I'm doing. And I think it makes me a better doctor in the long run as well.
Well, and I think the places like Hope Connections are so important, because that helps patients not rely only on their oncologist. It's kind of like, I imagine, I have not been through cancer and I don't want to presume anything, but there were a couple of lines that made me think it's almost like with your OB, when you're pregnant, you fall a little bit in love,
right?
And, you know, that's kind of with your oncologist. This is someone, you know, who becomes larger than life in a way. And so Liza, one of the things that must have been helpful to you is knowing that an oncologist is a very much flawed human being already.
Yeah, well, yes, because, well, you say, I mean, we do go out, it is like going out with a rock star sometimes. I mean, particularly when we do,
No, it's not.
but the adoration, I mean, people have when we run into somebody out at dinner and,
Right.
Dr. Marshall, and, they're so excited to meet me, which is nice, but, I mean, this is before the book. I mean, just this, like, everything about John's life they want to know and be a part of. And,
Right.
and I do understand that. So.
Yeah, Liza was at work today, though, and I introduced her to one of my colleagues again, and he says, "Oh, the famous author." So she's getting it now.
There you go. And here is another, the famous children. Michelle Warner asks, what were some great ways your kids supported you as a couple while you went through this? Which I think is a terrific thing to ask. Thank you, Michelle.
Yeah. Well, I think one of the biggest, it's sort of specific and a general, I guess. In the specific category, I think we talk about going to look at wigs. I mean, they did a lot of just sort of showing up at things without acting like it was weird. I mean, they were pretty easy-going about all of that. And what I was going to say more generally is, in a sense, one of the great things they did was they went on living their lives. And now, having said that, we sort of, as John mentioned about both the article and the book, we now, and they have come back to us and said, well, gosh, we really didn't know all that. So then you kind of back to, well, did we cause them psychological damage? Because, maybe they were repressing a lot more than we realized. But I think as a family, we just very much tried to, not to ignore it, but to incorporate it into life. We're gonna say you're gonna say cancer. We're gonna talk about the wig. I'm gonna have my wig off, and
I love that you say top down when unexpectedly and there's no wig on.
Right.
That was great.
Trying to control the neighborhood children. But, anyway, so I think for us at least, that was.
Yeah, I do, and I talk to my patients about their kids and try to understand where they are with that, and we're very lucky. Our kids were, really very normal through all of this, as we said, and because not every kid's like that, and some are the ones that need to get the counseling and or are really feeling it more because they're afraid they're going to lose their parent, right? I mean, it's more of a loss in some ways for a child. And the 3 and 4-year-olds don't know what's going on. It's really that 9, 10, 11, 12-year-old that it's hardest to get through, in my opinion. Yeah. And because they're old enough to get it, they're old enough to Google stuff when you're not around, and have, they're listening too. Their antenna are up.
Very good point.
And so they know more than we think they know. Let's put it that way. And particularly kids today know more than we think they know.
That would take us down a rabbit hole that would go so far beyond. I do want to just say that Noel Swearingen said, this isn't a question, but I'm happy to hear about a book written by another person who has had triple negative cancer, especially the same year I did. Thank you so much. And so I think it's wonderful to hear about another survivor. That is really That's fantastic. So glad you're here, Noel.
Yes.
Hannah Joyner asks, could you talk a little bit more about the process of writing this book together? Most books have a solo narrator. How did you find a way to create a cohesive work together?
Well, we have to go back to Marianne, who really, none of this would be in any form whatsoever without her. I mean, both her vision of it and then really helping us, but at a very pragmatic level, we wrote separately. Mine's very linear time-wise, and John's is a little bit more of sort of riffs on, I use the term riff, that's probably not respectful, but yeah, but his opinions on a variety of aspects of cancer care. And we literally just printed all the chapters out and put them on the floor in our room back there, and had 2 really nice dogs who were very helpful and moved the pages around. And there was the book. No, we did, the 3 of us together, I think, interwove the chapters so that they made some kind of coherent sense. But that took a while. I mean, we would do that and then we would read it again and it's, no, that doesn't quite work. And I think Mary Ann.
We only wrote 2 things together.
Yeah.
And I tell you, that was hard. If we had to write the whole book together, we would have gotten divorced.
We wrote a prologue, which we then took out.
We took out. Yeah. So, I mean, because we talk differently, we think differently.
Easier to get through cancer than writing a book.
Right.
Yeah.
That's the next book.
Yeah. So we went off, we literally didn't look at each other's. Mary Ann was looking at what each of us was writing, but we didn't look at each other's. And till we thought we were done. And then we read each other's and went from there. And so we, like I say, we didn't strategize, right? We kind of knew what the other was doing.
Interesting, yeah.
But we said, we're just going to go off and do it the way we wanted to and see what happened.
You didn't need to strategize. You had the best coach.
We did have a great coach.
You know,
But it still makes me mad. That's one of my favorite stories is that, so we were over in Oxford on sabbatical and we would send the chapter when we were done to Mary Ann by email. And we'd wake up the next morning and there'd be edits in our inbox and hers had all these smiley face A+ on it. And mine were ripped to shreds, just red everywhere. And so anyway, I'm here next to the
she's a word person. She's the lawyer. She, you know.
Wrote 2 times as many words as I did too.
I had
somebody had to edit it.
I had to get it off my chest. It had to come off my chest.
It had to come off your chest.
It's all in a computer somewhere.
Now, I've got a couple of other questions for you. We talked about the process for writing the book. Lynn asks, has John talked with his oncology colleagues about this experience and how they might make some changes in the way they relate to patients?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And in fact, right after Liza's diagnosis, I really went on a mission to try and create infrastructure within our department that would try to get a little closer to the care that we were receiving. So a new layer of nurses actually we put in place, and MedStar supported that. And
are they still there? Does that
fantastic? So if once you get a diagnosis, it's one phone call navigator that you right from there, and then they help coordinate what you need, a human being that helps kind of coach you right from the start. Because we had that, and it was really nice. It was really good thing. So
and very, very difficult to do without.
I don't know how people do it without. So absolutely, we train doctors, right? So we train oncologists, and the demonstrate, leading by example, but also coaching them about what it feels like. And then they too understood part of the reason for my sabbatical was because of the impact of all of this on me personally. There was other work that we did during the 9 months that was cut short, we do share. The answer is we share. I talk about it in my lectures now, have for a while, actually.
Well, and talking about burnout too, I think you incorporate a lot into his lectures, so that oncologists around the country, I think, many of them already were thinking about this, but I think bringing it to a more, you can't find a solution for it until everybody's starting to talk about it and what the issue is.
Well, and so I'm just stepping forward and saying it happened to me, right? And I was lucky enough to have a way to take a break. And I was actually at a meeting this past weekend with 3 other colleagues who also took sabbaticals for the same reason. We all know that, but they haven't been quite as public. So we've all agreed to put something in our journals about this and begin to talk about it.
The medical journals.
Right. No, I think that's fascinating, because we have seen, of course, I know you have another blurb from Siddhartha Mukherjee, who's the emperor of all maladies, is one of the most talked about, discussed, acclaimed books about cancer. And so it does seem that we are getting new perspectives from oncologists about now, not just what you already knew, the science, the medicine, but also about personal experiences, negotiating this journey. And so with that, I have to segue to a last question, and then we'll have a few more minutes in case anyone else wants to ask one. But Mara Kilgore says, what other books, stories, and people did you take inspiration from? And certainly Siddhartha is one who you must have taken inspiration from, but I'm sure there are other works as well.
Yeah, I actually also really love Atul Gawande's Being Mortal, which I think is such, it really does what I think to this extent we had hoped to, takes a really sort of clear-eyed look at people with, in his case, people with terminal illnesses or people approaching who are aging. And I think he really brings some wonderful research into that, and also some real humanity, I think. And I mean, I think it's an area that needs a lot of humanity that doesn't really get it right now. And he has really expanded that conversation.
Yeah, and we've read many of the books about medical professionals who've gotten cancer, the lectures, when breath becomes there. Yeah, these kind of things.
Well, and I don't know if anybody's read Julie Yip Williams' book, The Unwinding of the Miracle.
Oh,
which is, she's actually,
quite a story.
John's actually, she saw John and is part of the Colorectal Cancer Alliance, which we're very involved with. But that, and it's a very different book. I mean, she was, she was understandably very angry. I mean, and she left 2 small children, and she had an incredible life. I mean, and a life in which you sort of like, why is this happening to me now after all the things I have overcome? So I understand, but it's I had that in my head, as we were editing it. I'm not sure if I read it before we wrote the book, but certainly as we were putting it together, and it is a very, very different, but also, I hope I can say, I put myself in the same sentence, but very honest look at the difficulties of cancer treatment, and the psychological difficulties of cancer treatment, I think.
And that is a really important point, because it's not just the physical side effects, which you do detail and which you are very careful to talk about how they build on things and how all these comorbidities and all the appointments you have to go to. But along with that comes a lot of psychological difficulty. Pain is one of the toughest things for humans to face. And the more, just when you were on and I'm going to say this, adriamycin, is that how you say it? When you were on the Red Devil,
right.
And the foot pain that you went through, Liza, was just inhuman. It's so awful. And yet that was something you were doing so that you could be a survivor.
And this is what makes cancer, I think, in many ways, a unique medical situation, because if you need an operation to take out your appendix, it's pain and it will fix it, right? Or you need your hip done, or you're going to have a cardiac bypass. It is a moment, but on the flip side, you're pretty much good, right? You can tell people how they're going to be. With cancer, you're gambling.
Yeah.
She might have been cured right from the beginning, but no, because we're afraid, we're going to take even more treatment, right? And we're going to endure side effects. And then you start to wonder about, are these side effects, did I have to, right? Was that worth it? So when you say pain is an important driver of motivation, I think fear and uncertainty in many ways makes people in our world make, very hard decisions, or decisions where they just don't want to regret, right? They don't want to look back and say, if only I.
Exactly.
Right? And so we tend to then overtreat, right? We overcompensate because we want to make sure that we look back and say, well, we did everything we knew what to do. And then, patients who are then waiting, I think one of the most difficult periods is after you've been treated, and then you're waiting to know whether you're going to die or not, right? It's really that.
Right.
So I do think that uncertainty of this disease is difficult.
And we only have a couple of minutes left. And of course, the two of you can interact with anyone. You can stay for as long as you want, but I know I had better at least stop my babbling on. But I think one of the really important things here is, John, you mentioned in a conversation when we were talking before about there being cancer world and then couple world. And I think we've covered those two things really well. But the third world is survivor world. And so I want to ask you, Liza, you are in survivor world. I know that breast cancer is something that really, you're never 100% certain, are you? I mean, breast cancer is something that's so difficult to get out of your head, even if it's out of your body. But where are you now as a survivor?
Yeah, well, I was fortunate in that I had triple negative. Not fortunate because it has a poor prognosis and is quite aggressive. Right. But unlike most other breast cancers, it really after you hit 3 to 5 years, which is actually the normal. Well,
for the other cancers.
Yeah, for other cancers, you go back to a sort of normal risk level. But I will say, I mean, as you said about the emotional and mental impact. Back to the wham, right? You recognize that wham happens, and it's just much closer to you. I think you realize life, and again, the pandemic and perhaps has given us all this lesson, but we can go from life's going along one day to the whole world is shut down and we can't go out of our houses without a mask on, and we're praying somebody's going to put a vaccine together. So I think that's both a blessing and a curse, is recognizing that life is tenuous, and it does make you appreciate things and try to maximize the time you do have, but it does make you worry perhaps a little more than others do.
Live every day.
Yeah.
Live every day.
It sounds corny, but try as much as you can.
I am so grateful to have been able to be here to talk to you, Liza, and John Marshall about Off Our Chests. I really encourage everyone to get their own copy. You will want it. You will want to share it. And thank you for taking the time to speak with me tonight for the Arlington Public Library. I'm going to turn it back over.
Before you sneak off, we just
okay.
to have somebody of your status and stature to read our book, but then also spend your valuable time with us tonight. I mean, it really means a lot to us.
Oh, thank you.
And we really appreciate it very much. We really do.
Oh, it's been a pleasure. And, maybe you'll write another book. Who knows?
Yeah.
Not about you.
Just read whatever you tell us to read.
Yes. We'll wait for the top 10 and pick one.
I will definitely, those I'll pass along. So have a great evening. And Brittany, I'm going to toss it back to you now.
Thank you, Beth Ann. I just wanted to thank everyone for coming. I am really so happy that we could have Beth Ann here interviewing the Marshalls and having the Marshalls share their experience. So as Jennifer said at the beginning, we are going to email everyone who registered a recording of this interview, and we will notify the winners of the raffle sometime this week or early next. So thank you again for coming, everybody, and I hope you all have a good night.
Thanks.
Bye.